It's one of those things, when they said that they don't teach about the Holocaust. Well, we don't think that's proper. They teach about World War II in some way. I don't know what they actually teach. They don't teach about the Holocaust. They don't teach about the atrocities. I don't know what they thought their relationship with World War II is. Even if your country wasn't directly, literally involved in the frontline fighting, there was definitely a material impact, including insofar as your leadership was directly implicated in actions associated with what happened. But they also had the entirety of their material existence impacted by changes to laws regarding movements of people, who was allowed to go where and when and how. That would then change the kind of relationship they would have with that country. See, if you go to another place and you're meant to go there seasonally or temporarily, and you're an immigrant, and so there are certain laws you have to follow because you're a guest. That's one thing. But if you go there and then either there is unrest in your country of origin and you want to be a law abiding person and you want to be a moral person, but the means by which to do that in your home country have been altered, or there's some sort of political conflict in the country you're in, and people are opportunistically exploiting the status of immigrants, including immigrants that had substantial resources connected to them being from where they're from, that country wants to be able to expropriate for themselves and use for their own purposes, including in manners that destabilize those countries of origin, and perhaps even slander and defame those people who are currently in that country, so they're not able to return and do anything as part of a attempted conflict resolution in their country of origin. Well, then you have a very different relationship later on when you say, well, we don't want to teach about the Holocaust. We don't want people to know about that. It's, it's not our history. It's everybody's history. So is this. This is in the paperback version. I don't use the hardcovers. That was part of the dowry. The paper books in case I'm in the field, right? Page 65. The Marines headed for Guadalcanal and heard of the atrocities committed by the Japanese army over the years. In 1938, Life magazine published photographs, smuggled out by a German businessman, of Japanese atrocities in Nanking. Nanking, capital of China, had fallen to the Japanese on December 13th, 1937. As the Japanese entered the capital, only unarmed civilians remained. The victorious troops plastered the city with billboards featuring a smiling Japanese soldier handing a bowl of rice to an appreciative Chinese child. The poster proclaimed the peaceful intentions of co-prosperity. But instead, the Chinese suffered an orgy of torture and death. In less than a month, Japanese troops, with the encouragement of their officers, killed up to 350,000 Chinese civilians. Pregnant women were marched to one killing field where Japanese placed bets on the sex of the fetus about to tumble from its mother's womb, cut by a samurai sword. In another area of town, drunken soldiers laughed and tossed babies into the air to be skewered on the ends of their buddies' bayonets. Dogs grew too fat to walk, feasting on the corpses in the streets. 350,000, that amounted to more civilians dying in one city in 1 month than died in entire countries during the entire war. In 6 years of combat, France lost 108,000 civilians, Belgium 101,000, the Netherlands 242,000. The Japanese in Nanking killed even more than the atomic bombs later would. Hiroshima had 140,000 dead, Nagasaki 70,000. The Japanese loot all, kill all, burn all, scorched earth policy in North China would eventually reduce the population from 44 million to 25 million. Co-prosperity indeed. The U.S. Army had encountered the Japanese Army's ways in the Philippines and Burma. Stories of buddies found trussed like pigs, disemboweled with their severed genitals in their mouths circulated, as did horrifying accounts of boys staked in the hot sun, forced to endure the voracious bugs who savored the honey rubbed into the prisoners' eyes and mouth. However, the Marines on Guadalcanal had not experienced the atrocities firsthand and found them hard to believe until they mistakenly extended a hand of mercy to the Japanese. Does this story sound familiar? On August 11th, Frank Goetsch led a patrol to rescue a Japanese unit on an isolated spit of ground in Guadalcanal. Marine intelligence had reported sighting a white flag, and a captured Japanese soldier said the unit was unable to maintain itself and inclined to give up. Goetsch called for volunteers to rescue the Japanese unit. 25, including an interpreter and a Navy surgeon, stepped forward. Landing on the beach identified by the informant, Goetsch announced that he was there to help the trapped Japanese. His offer was met by withering gunfire. After hours of fighting, only one Marine managed to escape and swim away. As he looked back at the bloody shore, he could see the glint of Japanese swords hacking his buddies' bodies. A Marine patrol later found the mutilated corpses. They had been violated in the worst possible manner. Chunks of flesh with the Marine Corps symbol tattooed on them had been hacked off of arms and stuffed into their mouths. The Marines began to realize they were fighting a war of no rules. What shocked Marine sensibility the most was the Japanese treatment of their non-combatant corpsmen. The U.S. Navy medics would respond to calls for help from wounded Japanese who would cry, "Corpsman, Corpsman," in English. When the corpsmen came to their aid, they were then either treacherously shot by the wounded Japanese or blown up by hand grenades concealed on their bodies. You can say it didn't happen, right? What do you do if you're in armed conflict, especially if you agreed to go to arms and that's what you encounter? What do you do if people pretending that they're doing one thing are actually doing something else, and then they try to give you a story about how they didn't know their own history?